Medellin, Colombia, late 1960s. The city looked peaceful from far away. Mountains hugging the skyline, warm air drifting through crowded streets. But if you walked deeper into the neighborhoods, you'd feel it. Poverty, hustle, survival. That was where Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria grew up. Not rich, not powerful. Just a skinny kid with sharp eyes and a bigger ego than most grown men. A kid with dangerous dreams. Pablo was born on December 1, 1949 in Rio Negro, but he grew up in Medellin, a place that would later become the center of his empire. His father was a farmer. His mother, Hermilda Gaviria, was a school teacher. One evening, when Pablo was still young, he sat at the dinner table staring at his plate. Hermilda noticed. "Pablo, why you looking like that? Eat your food." Pablo leaned forward, eyes burning with confidence. "One day, Ma, I'm gonna be rich. Not just rich, filthy rich." Hermilda frowned. "Rich from what? You study hard, you become a lawyer or engineer." Pablo smirked. "Nah, I ain't waiting my whole life for money. I'm gonna get it fast." That sentence, that was the beginning of everything. Small crimes, big attitude. By his teenage years, Pablo wasn't interested in school anymore. He was interested in money. Fast money. He started with petty crimes, nothing flashy at first, selling fake diplomas, smuggling stolen cigarettes, stealing car parts. One night, standing near a dusty street corner, Pablo talked with one of his friends. "Yo, Pablo, this is risky, man. Cops catch us, we're done." Pablo laughed softly. "Relax, bro. Risky money is the only money worth chasing." That mindset, it never changed, not once. The first real step into crime. By the early 1970s, Pablo wasn't just a street hustler anymore. He was becoming something bigger, smarter, more dangerous. He started forming partnerships that would soon turn into the Medellin Cartel, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in history. And America was becoming his biggest customer.
Late 1970s. Medellin was buzzing. Loud streets, crowded markets, and behind the scenes, a new kind of business was exploding. Cocaine wasn't just a street product anymore. It was turning into big money, crazy money. And right in the middle of it all stood Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, calm, confident, and hungry for power. Building the Medellin Cartel. By the late 1970s, Pablo wasn't working alone anymore. He knew something important. One man can hustle, but a team can build an empire. So he started forming alliances with other traffickers, powerful names who controlled production, transportation, and distribution. These partnerships slowly became what the world would later know as the Medellin Cartel. Inside a private meeting room one night, Pablo sat at the head of the table. Several men stared at him, suspicious, cautious. "So, what's your plan, Pablo?" Pablo leaned forward, fingers locked together. "We control everything, from the labs to the planes to the streets in America." Another man raised an eyebrow. "You're talking big, man. That's risky business." Pablo smirked. "Big risks make big kings." Nobody argued after that. The first massive shipments. Early cocaine shipments were small, a few kilos at a time, but Pablo had bigger ideas. He started using airplanes, not tiny ones, but serious cargo aircraft, hidden compartments, secret airstrips, corrupt officials. One night at a rural airfield, a pilot walked toward Pablo nervously. "Yo, Pablo, this load is heavy, man. That's a lot of product." Pablo lit a cigarette, calm as ever. "Heavy load means heavy money, my friend." The engines roared. Boxes filled with cocaine were loaded quickly. Target destination? The United States. Cities like Miami, Los Angeles, and New York City became the biggest markets. Demand was wild, profits were insane, and Pablo, he was stacking cash faster than anyone had ever seen. Money like nobody had ever seen. By the early 1980s, Pablo Escobar wasn't just rich, he was filthy rich. Millions turned into billions. Cash was everywhere, so much cash that they literally ran out of places to store it. Warehouses, suitcases, buried barrels underground. One day inside a storage building, one of Pablo's men looked shocked. Crew member, "Boss, we got rats chewing the money." Pablo laughed, not worried at all. "Let him eat. We got more where that came from." Reports later estimated that Pablo's cartel was making millions of dollars every single day. That kind of money changes everything. The rise of power and respect. Money alone wasn't enough for Pablo. He wanted power, respect from ordinary people. So he started spending money on communities. He built houses for poor families, soccer fields, schools, community centers. In many poor neighborhoods of Medellin, people started seeing Pablo as a hero. One afternoon, standing near a newly built housing block, an elderly man shook Pablo's hand. "Old man, God bless you, Don Pablo. Nobody ever helped us like this." Pablo smiled slightly. "Everybody deserves a roof, hermano." To many poor families, he wasn't a criminal, he was a provider. That made him even more dangerous, because now he had loyalty. Entering politics, a dangerous move. By 1982, Pablo decided to step into politics, not secretly, publicly. He ran as an alternate member of the Colombian Congress, and surprisingly, he won a political seat connected to the government of Bogotá. One evening, sitting with his trusted men, Pablo spoke proudly. "See that? Now I'm not just rich, I'm official." One of his men laughed. "Man, you really running the game now." Pablo leaned back, smiling confidently. "They can't touch me now." But that confidence, it was about to be tested. The first serious enemy appears. Power attracts attention, and attention brings enemies. A Colombian politician named Rodrigo Lara Bonilla started investigating Pablo. He publicly accused him of being involved in drug trafficking. During a tense moment in political circles, Lara Bonilla spoke openly against him. "This man is not a leader. He is a criminal hiding behind power." That statement hit Pablo hard, not because it hurt his feelings, but because it threatened his empire. Inside a private meeting, Pablo slammed his hand on the table. "This dude thinks he can ruin me?" Silence filled the room. One of his men whispered carefully, "What you want to do, boss?" Pablo's voice turned cold. "We handle it." And that decision changed Colombia forever. The violence began. In 1984, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla was assassinated. This event shocked the country. It also marked the beginning of a long period of violent conflict between the government and Pablo's cartel. Suddenly, Pablo wasn't just a trafficker, he was public enemy number one. The government began chasing him seriously, and Pablo, he responded the only way he knew, with force.
Mid-1980s. By now, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was no longer just a trafficker. He was the most feared man in Colombia. Money was flowing, power was growing, but pressure from the government was getting stronger every day, and Pablo hated one word more than anything: extradition. That meant criminals from Colombia could be sent to the United States to face trial. To Pablo, that was worse than prison. Inside a dimly lit room, surrounded by his closest men, Pablo spoke slowly. "I'd rather have a grave in Colombia than a jail cell in America." Nobody questioned him, because everyone knew this fight was about survival now. The war against extradition. By the mid-1980s, Colombian authorities, with support from the United States Drug Administration, began hunting cartel leaders harder than ever. Raids increased, arrests increased, pressure increased. Pablo responded with fear tactics. He launched what became known as a campaign against extradition. Posters appeared in cities, warning politicians and judges. Messages were simple: support extradition and face consequences. One night, Pablo sat in his hideout, studying reports. A trusted lieutenant spoke carefully. "Lieutenant, boss, government ain't backing down." Pablo stayed calm, flipping through papers. "Pablo, then we make them scared to even try." And that mindset turned the country into chaos. Life inside luxury, Hacienda Nápoles. While violence spread across the country, Pablo built a personal kingdom, a massive private estate called Hacienda Nápoles. This place wasn't just a mansion, it was like a private city. The estate included a large mansion, private zoo with exotic animals, airstrips, luxury cars, swimming pools, guest houses. Inside the property, Pablo lived like royalty. One afternoon, walking near the estate lake, one of his men admired the place. Crew member: "Boss, this place looks like something out of a movie." Pablo smiled slightly. "Work hard, take risks, you earn this." But behind that luxury, fear followed him everywhere, because by now, the government in the US were closing in. The United States gets involved. By the late 1980s, the cocaine problem in American cities was exploding. Cities like Miami became major entry points for cartel shipments. Authorities in the United States increased cooperation with Colombian forces. Special units were formed. Technology improved. Surveillance expanded. Inside a secret meeting room in Colombia, investigators studied photos of Pablo. One officer pointed at the picture. "This guy ain't just a trafficker, he's running a whole system." Another officer nodded. "And a system can be broken." That belief pushed the hunt forward. Fear across Colombia. By the late 1980s, ordinary citizens in Medellin lived with constant fear. Explosions, threats, assassinations of officials all became part of daily life. Businesses closed early, people avoided public places, parents warned children to stay indoors. One night, inside a small shop, two men whispered nervously. Shop owner: "You hear what happened today?" Customer: "Yeah, people saying it's cartel business again." The owner sighed deeply. "This city ain't safe no more, man." Fear had taken over the streets. And Pablo? He stayed hidden, moving from safe house to safe house. The government strikes back. Colombian authorities strengthened their fight. Elite police units began targeting cartel operations. Money routes were tracked. Properties were seized. Smugglers were arrested. Inside a secret meeting room in Bogota, officials discussed strategy. Official: "We can't let one man control the country." Another official replied firmly: "We keep pressure on him until he breaks." And slowly, that pressure began working. Pablo's network was still strong, but cracks were forming. Enemies from all sides. By the end of the 1980s, Pablo faced enemies everywhere: Colombian government, US law enforcement, rival traffickers, former allies. Trust became rare. Even close associates feared betrayal. One night, inside a secret hideout, a nervous associate spoke to Pablo. "Boss, people switching sides." Pablo stayed silent for a moment, then he replied coldly, "Then we find out who before they find us." Paranoia became part of everyday life. Nobody trusted anyone fully. The pressure builds toward surrender. By 1990, the pressure was massive. Law enforcement operations were tightening. Public anger was rising. International attention was growing. Pablo realized something important. He couldn't run forever. Inside a quiet room, speaking to his closest advisors, Pablo finally said something unexpected. "Maybe it's time to make a deal." The men looked shocked, because Pablo Escobar, he never backed down. Until now. Early 1990s. After years of violence, pressure from the government of Colombia had reached a breaking point. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria knew the situation was getting risky. His enemies were multiplying, his network was cracking, and authorities, with help from the United States Drug Enforcement Administration, were closing in fast. For the first time in years, Pablo made a move nobody expected. He decided to surrender, but only under one condition: a very unusual agreement. In 1991, the Colombian government agreed to a deal with Pablo. The deal shocked people across the country. Instead of being sent to prison like normal criminals, Pablo was allowed to build and stay inside his own special prison called La Catedral. Yes, his own prison. Inside a meeting with officials, Pablo spoke calmly. "I'll surrender, but I stay here, under my rules." Government officials hesitated, but the country was desperate to stop the violence. Eventually, they agreed, and that decision would later be seen as a major mistake. Inside La Catedral, luxury behind bars. When people imagine prison, they think of metal bars and strict guards, but La Catedral was nothing like that. It looked more like a private resort. Inside the compound were comfortable rooms, a soccer field, a bar, a large outdoor view of the valley, entertainment areas. Visitors went and went. Friends visited freely. Trusted men stayed close. One afternoon, standing on a balcony overlooking the mountains, Pablo spoke to one of his guards.
Guard boss, this place ain't feel like prison at all. Pablo chuckled. That's because it ain't, my friend. Even though he was officially imprisoned, Pablo still controlled many operations from inside. Phones were available, meetings happened regularly, orders were passed quietly. The empire wasn't gone, it was just running from behind walls. Trouble inside the walls. For a while, the arrangements seemed stable. Violence across Colombia reduced slightly. Authorities hoped the deal would calm the country, but inside La Catedral, tensions were rising. Pablo began suspecting some of his own associates of betrayal, especially over missing money. One evening, inside a private room, Pablo confronted two of his associates. "Money's gone, and you telling me you don't know nothing?" One of the men shook his head nervously. "Boss, I swear, we didn't take it." Pablo stared at them silently. The room felt heavy with tension. Soon after, authorities learned that serious crimes had taken place inside the prison. That was the moment the government realized this situation was out of control. The government changes its mind. By mid-1992, Colombian officials decided they had made a mistake. They could no longer allow Pablo to remain inside his special prison. Plans were made to transfer him to a normal facility. Inside government offices in Bogota, officials spoke urgently. "We move him immediately, no more special treatment." Another officer nodded. This time, no deals. But Pablo had strong connections, and somehow, he found out about the transfer plan before it happened. The escape from La Catedral. July 1992. Government forces arrived at La Catedral to move Pablo to another prison, but by the time they reached him, he was gone, escaped, vanished into the mountains surrounding the prison. Inside a nearby control room, an officer shouted in shock, "He's gone! He slipped out before we got here!" The news spread quickly. Pablo Escobar had escaped, again. And now the situation was worse than ever. Because he was no longer protected by any agreement, he was officially a fugitive again. The manhunt begins. After the escape, Colombian authorities launched one of the biggest manhunts in history. Special search teams were created to hunt him down. These units worked closely with international forces, including help connected to the United States Drug Enforcement Administration. The mission was simple: find Pablo Escobar, capture him, end his empire. Inside a strategy room, officers studied maps and photos. This ain't just about catching one man, it's about ending a whole system. Search teams began tracking his movements, listening to calls, watching contacts, following rumors. The hunt had truly begun. Life on the run again. After escaping La Catedral, Pablo returned to life as a fugitive. But this time, things were different. His power had weakened, many allies had disappeared, enemies were everywhere, even rival groups were now hunting him. Inside a dark safe house, one of his remaining men spoke nervously. "Boss, we losing people, nobody feels safe anymore." Pablo sat silently, staring at the wall. Then he spoke quietly. "We keep moving, stay ahead of them." But deep down, even he knew his empire was falling apart.
Late 1992. After escaping from La Catedral, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was officially on the run again. But this time, everything was different. His empire was collapsing, many allies were gone, and the hunt for him had become the top priority for authorities in Colombia. A special unit known as the Search Block, working alongside support from the United States Drug Enforcement Administration, began tracking him day and night. This wasn't just another search, this was the final chase. Living like a ghost. For months, Pablo moved constantly, one house tonight, another location tomorrow, never staying long, never trusting too many people. Inside a small safe house one evening, one of his remaining men spoke nervously. "Associate, boss, everybody looking for you now. Government, rivals, everybody." Pablo stayed quiet for a moment. Then he spoke calmly. "Gang don't run forever, but he don't quit either." Still, life on the run wasn't easy anymore. Money was harder to move, communication was risky, trust was almost gone. Even loyal followers were scared. The weak spot: family contact. Authorities realized something important. No matter how powerful Pablo was, he still cared deeply about his family, especially his son. And that became the turning point. Investigators began monitoring phone activity across Medellin, hoping he would make contact. Inside a command center, officers watched signals carefully. "Officer, he's careful, but sooner or later he gonna call someone." Another officer nodded. "And when he does, we move fast." Days passed, weeks passed, then finally, a signal appeared. December 2nd, 1993, the location is found. On December 2nd, 1993, Pablo made a phone call to his family. Authorities traced the signal to a residential neighborhood in Medellin. Inside the command room, tension filled the air. "Commander, that's him. We got the location." Search teams moved quickly. Vehicles rushed toward the building. Officers surrounded the area carefully. No delays, no hesitation. This was the moment they had waited for. The final moments. When authorities reached the house, Pablo realized something was wrong. He tried to escape through the rooftop, but the area was already surrounded. Officers moved in. Moments later, the pursuit ended. After years of running one of the largest criminal empires in history, Pablo Escobar's life came to an end on December 2nd, 1993 in Medellin. The long chase was finally over. Aftermath: the empire falls. News of Pablo Escobar's death spread quickly across Colombia and around the world. For many people, it marked the end of one of the most violent chapters in the country's history. Without his leadership, the Medellin Cartel lost power, operations weakened, remaining members scattered or surrendered. Cities slowly began returning to normal, but the damage left behind took years to recover from. Legacy: fear, power, and consequences. Even today, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria remains one of the most talked about criminals in history. His story became known worldwide because of his massive drug empire, his wealth once estimated among the largest in the world, his war against the government, his unusual prison at La Catedra, and the intense manhunt that lasted years. Some people remembered him for building homes and helping poor communities. Others remembered him for the fear and violence that followed his rise. But one thing is certain: his story became a warning about how power built on crime eventually collapses. The end.